We got the front end pulled off of the car again. Trying to debate how I would really want to attack this, but I started working on pulling the headlights out of the LX front end, and I think I'm going to take the header panel out of here too, since it's a pretty nice piece yet. It's not all busted up like the one that's in this GT front end that I got. The GT front end, it looks like someone might have cracked it up a little bit. It looks like it wasn't completely broken apart, but you can tell they kind of gooped it up a little bit to try to fix up some spots where it was cracked or busted. I got my updated list. I had a whole bunch of stuff crossed out on here before, so I erased that all and started a new list. So it's kind of a lot to do with these couple of front ends, getting all that stuff out. I should add, I think I'm gonna just end up pulling the power steering rack off of the original K member and hanging onto that, just in case I need to use it or want to use it in the future. I do have to mention, I had the Maximum Motorsports subframe connectors. Those are going. I got those sold already. And I ended up ordering some Detroit Speed Engineering subframe connectors, the through the floor weld and subframe connectors. So I'm really excited about that. I just ordered them last night. Got the Cobra rear end just sitting here. I think one of the next things I'm going to do is start stripping this down, since I'm out here working alone for the most part, but get it stripped down so that I'm just down to the subframe, and then I can get these brackets off of here, and then just move that subframe around and work on getting that mounted up underneath the car instead of trying to wrestle that whole rear end around. February 3rd, back out in the garage again. It's been over a week. Haven't had a lot of time to get out here. So I had a little bit of energy tonight, so I thought I'd get back out here and start tearing into this again. I finally got, if you remember from a video before, I used to have the whole front cross member laying under here. Well, I went to pull the steering rack off of it in case I need to use that again later. Just in case, it's kind of a messy, slobby thing, so I'll probably end up replacing it, but I thought, well, just in case, I'll pull it off of there. Next on my list was getting this rear bumper off. I had a bunch of stuff laid in the back, had the driver's seat out, but I just loosely bolted that back down, flipped the rear seat back up, just getting stuff out of the way. So as you can see, got one of the taillights off, and I'm seeing what it takes to get this rear bumper off. Figured I'd have to get the taillights off, get that out of there, and it looks like there's some other little bolts that hold on, like this top front edge of this bumper and then down the side. So I think I have to get down into that trunk drop off there. It's pretty hard to see, pretty dark. So I'll get that off of there and hopefully get this rear bumper off. So what I'm thinking is, once I get this rear bumper off, I'm probably going to take the hood and the front fenders off too. Then I'm going to really start tearing into getting this IRS mounted back up under here. So my next step with that, I'll get that all disassembled, so all I have left is the subframe, so I can hopefully handle moving that around and getting that under the car myself. And I'm thinking with these rear mounts, I'm gonna do it what I think is the right way. So instead of just welding them to it or using the holes that are there and having this thing sitting cockeyed underneath the back of the car, I'm thinking I might move that nutsert in the frame so it can use the stock hole. I don't know. I'm half tempted just to weld a piece of metal onto the side here and just make a new hole in that bracket instead of moving the nutsert that's in the frame for the quad shock. Well, I spent a few minutes working on this. Of course, there's 3 bolts that go down into that trunk drop off that hold the bumper on, and then a few of these little bolts across the front of the trunk area here. Then I got over here to this trunk drop off on this side, and you can kind of see it right there in the bottom. It's way down there. But that's the last one that I need to get loose, and it's dang near impossible to get to. So I think before I get frustrated and end up ruining something, I'm going to take a break from that and maybe maybe move on to doing something else here, like popping off this front. I thought I'd pop off this front bumper, like the bumper reinforcement here, and get that off and maybe start pulling these front fenders off. It's been a couple days since I was out here last, finally getting out here again, kind of tearing knuckles up a little bit out here, but that's what happens when you're working on cars. So I finally did dink around with the rear bumper cover again, and like I was alluding to before, there's one bolt that's way down there in the trunk drop off, but I finally did use a 1/4" drive with a swivel on it and the right size socket, and somehow managed to weasel it down there, squeeze my arm in between the panel here, and got the extension down in there with the socket onto the little nut, and managed to get the little 1/4" drive ratchet on there. And luckily that stuff isn't super tight, and I had just enough room to rotate that ratchet around and get the bumper loose. So bumper is ready to come off. Well, really getting this car torn into now. Got the bumper cover off and removed the rear bumper structure itself. So it had all sorts of dirt and rust all jammed up in this back bumper, and you can see everything on the floor here. So there's 128,000 miles of road gunk and rust, and luckily went to take these bolts out of the bumper, and the one in this hole broke, but luckily I could get a pliers on it, and it spun easily enough, surprisingly, for how rusty and dirty and how much dirt was all trapped up in this bumper structure here. Luckily it looks like it's mostly just surface rust. It doesn't look like there's any soft spots really in it. And of course the outside, the part that went underneath the bumper cover, all looks pretty decent. It's just the stuff where it was directly in the line of fire underneath the car where it looks kind of cruddy. So but take that and get it sandblasted somewhere and clean it up and just get some new hardware for it. I did take the front, that GT bumper cover off, and got the bumper support off of there, leaning up there. Had my son come out here and help me, and we just got the hood off the car to get that out of the way so I have more access to stuff. Next steps is getting these crash sensors off. I think I'm going to go with an aftermarket wheel, get rid of that airbag wheel anyway. And get this front wiring harness out of here and get that out of the way so I can start cleaning up under the hood. I'm going to start getting this stripped down a little bit more and get it down to the point where I can start getting that rear subframe on for that IRS and get that under the rear end of the car. Figure out how I'm going to run new brake lines and all that stuff. And then I think I am going to get this underside of the car painted, get this spring or get that coated, get it black underneath, and go on from there. Right, I thought I'd do one more quick little walk around to the car, making a little bit of progress. I think the last thing I showed, I had a pile of crap on the floor here, so I got all the bumper off of the back of the car, the bumper reinforcement, covers off, taillights are all out, kind of cleaned up my mess, got everything kind of set out of the way here. I did go around and pulled all the crash sensors off that were in here and removed the brackets that were in here behind, I think the headlights sit right about there. So I got rid of all those brackets. I figure I'll go to an aftermarket steering wheel anyway. Get rid of that big airbag steering wheel. I did go around and I pulled out all the headlight wiring harness. So that's all out of the way now. Thinking I'll probably end up going with smooth fenders, and even though I'm not gonna paint body color right away, I thought maybe I'll go around and get the smooth inner fenders in for when I get the other engine in, because I My thought is that I want to get the engine in there and run any sort of wiring, brakes, all that sort of thing, and cut holes in those smooth fender wells before I have them painted body color. I'm getting things pulled apart here. Figure next step here is getting fenders off and just getting some of that other stuff out of the way so I can see what I'm dealing with here. I think that's about as far as I'm gonna strip the car down, at least for the time being. I'll probably maybe before I get the fenders off, I'll get these side slats off. Since I'm going with that GT front end, I'm gonna go with a Cobra side slats, so that's just the smooth ones without the scoop, since I am keeping the rest of the body smooth, not putting any other ground effects on it. I did end up getting the moldings off and the side slats on both sides. The unfortunate part was with the side slats, when I was taking off these lower two bolts, they started spinning the stud out from inside the plastic slat. So as you can see here, those two studs mounted in there, and they just ended up twisting out on all of them. And then it got really sucky, because then you had that stud up on the inside with the nut on it that was kind of rusty, and then on the outside it had like a thin little shoulder on it. So I ended up just sticking a vice grip pliers on the outside of the stud and trying to spin that nut off of the inside until it just wouldn't go anymore, just from the rust. And then it was back the nut off far enough that the shoulder was a little ways away from the fender, so I could get the vice grip up around that big part of the shoulder and spin the nut off. Or actually on one on each side, I ended up just twisting the stud right apart. The molding came off pretty nice, except for on the driver's side. On this front stud here, it ended up breaking the plastic. So basically, I'm thinking I have some worthless little moldings here, unless they work well with 3 studs out of the 4. I think the next step is getting these fenders off. I think I showed the last thing I had pulled off all the crash sensors, the brackets for those, and the headlight harness I got pulled off. So pretty much everything's out of the way, except for, of course, the wiring harness from the interior to the front here. I think that's my next steps, is getting these front fenders off and kind of seeing where I'm at, and may get a few other things off. I think this can come off. I want to get all the cruise control hardware out of there, since that won't be needed in the future. I think probably pull the horns out of there just so they're out of the way, and then start tearing into this rear end. It's February 7th yet, Super Bowl Sunday. Out tinkering around in here trying to get a little more done, and as you can see, I had the front fenders off. So I think this is about as far as I'm going to strip the car down. Just a little more quick looking. I'm not discovering much more rust than what I thought I had before, just some surface rust. Still pretty impressed with how this car is, considering it's a 30-year-old, almost 130,000 mile Minnesota native car, as far as I know. So it's just kind of the same rust that I think I had pointed out in a previous video. This fender apron's going to get replaced anyway. I'm still debating about the radiator core support, if I'm going to do the tubular one. And I got the fenders laying here on the floor. They're looking pretty decent. This is the passenger side one. It's got just a little bit of surface rust around this inner fender lip, and it looked like it might have had some damage here and kind of wrinkled up the fender at one point in time, but in general it looks pretty decent. But you can kind of see there the fender is just a tad wrinkled on that inner fender lip, but I don't think it's anything I'm going to worry too much about. I think these fenders look pretty good, so we're going to try to save these and just kind of touch up some of this rust that's around this fender lip. And if we look at the driver's side fender, the left front, it's a similar story. Maybe a little bit more rust along the lip here. Some of the paint's flaking off. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing here. Looks like it might have a little bit of rust. A little bit of surface rust on the inside of that fender lip there. It's kind of hard to see. But I'll give them a closer examination once I have some time here. So yeah, it looks like there's a little bit of orange surface rust on the inside lip of this front fender. All in all, I'm pretty happy with it. So that's the driver's side yet. Again, there's that wrinkled spot on the passenger fender. Just some dirt up in there, it looks like. Nothing super obvious for rust on the inside of the lip of this one. It's just kind of on this outside surface where paint's flaking off a little bit, so we'll get that cleaned up. Upper part of the fender looks pretty good. We'll have a quick look at these inner fenders on the car. Some of this unibody structure looks pretty decent. Looks like there's some rust up inside there. So, in general, again, for a Minnesota car, and that's mostly surface rust, it looks like. I'll go around and poke around with a screwdriver, make sure there's nothing popping through this frame rail on this side. Looks like it's pretty, got some dirt and grime and stuff in there, so I'll do some poking and prodding and vacuuming and see what I get out of there and see how it looks. So passenger side, all this stuff looks pretty solid. This side actually looks better than the driver's side, up in that area anyway. Just some surface rust and crust. I think I got a pretty good base here. So I figured next thing I'd work on is getting rid of all the cruise control stuff. So I'm not going to have a need for that in the future, going with the Coyote engine. So I'll work on getting that out of there. One last update for today. Got the cruise control out. It was a little bit more difficult than I expected it to be. I actually had to get this little rubber boot out of the way, undo 2 little bolts inside there and get this canister off. Then there's 2 bolts there to get that bracket off. And then after I had it hanging there, I realized that I had looked like a vacuum line that went inside. And then this goes to a little electric control module that was mounted just inside the kick panel. You can actually see the bolt there where it was inside. Got that all out of there. It's just got the little rubber grommet that went through the firewall right there. And all the cruise control is now out, the old cruise control.